You're about to hear a story that proves, even in the most controlled place on Earth, a child's whisper can shatter the silence if the right person's listening. Buckingham Palace had never seen such a morning. Flags fluttered on poles. Brass shone. Rows of polished boots stomped in metronomic precision on the cobblestone. The Queen's birthday parade, a tradition older than memory, was unfolding with all its pageantry. Tourists pressed against metal barricades, craning their necks for a glimpse of royal history. Children on shoulders, phones raised, guards in bearskin hats standing immobile as stone. And in the very center of it all, in the third rank of the Queen's Royal Guard, one man stood stiller than all the rest. Unblinking, unflinching, Chuck Norris. His uniform was flawless. Tunic pressed, gloves pristine, boots mirror-bright. His face, partially shadowed by the towering black bearskin cap, gave nothing away. No movement, no breath, a living statue among many. Except Chuck was no statue, and this was no routine parade. He scanned the crowd through the slits of his narrowed eyes. No one noticed. They never did. Tourists didn't see what wasn't meant to be seen. A few yards ahead, VIP guests watched from a raised viewing platform. Politicians, diplomats, the Crown Prince of Denmark, the Princess of Wales, even a Hollywood actor or two. And somewhere within that crowd, Chuck knew, was the threat. He didn't know who, not yet, but he could feel it, a stillness inside the noise, the kind of cold breath predators take just before they strike. He'd been embedded here for 8 days under royal command. Officially, he was Staff Sergeant Richard Norris, Commonwealth Exchange Officer, a decorative role for a decorative day. Unofficially, he was a shadow on assignment from an international security accord, quietly tipped off by MI6 about a threat so vague it hadn't made it into briefing folders. But Chuck had felt it from the moment he stepped foot onto the parade grounds that morning. The timing, the route, the high-ranking officials gathered in one location. It was a kill box disguised as ceremony, and he had less than 20 minutes to find out where the blade was going to fall. Then he saw her. It happened between steps, just as the band shifted into the second movement of God Save the King. A little girl. She couldn't have been older than 9. Brown hair tucked into 2 uneven pigtails. Gray coat too big for her. Standing behind the crowd rail, between 2 flag-waving tourists who didn't seem to know she was there. She wasn't jumping or yelling. She wasn't even smiling. Just standing very still, looking directly at him, and raising her left hand. Not waving, not saluting, just lifting it, palm toward him, thumb folded across the center, fingers straight, then curled in, slowly. 1, 2, 3, fist. Chuck's heart stopped cold. It was the signal, not a public one, not known by civilians. A covert distress sign taught to children in field training camps, reserved for agents, children, or targets under surveillance. The kind of thing no one would ever do accidentally. A child signaling that they were in danger. Right now, somewhere very close. Chuck broke formation. He didn't turn first. He didn't call out. He just stepped forward, sharp, purposeful, cutting diagonally across the parade square toward the girl. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones went up. Commentators in nearby booths whispered into microphones. One of the guards has moved? We're not sure what's happening. Security noticed. 2 palace marshals began to converge on him from the sides. But Chuck didn't break stride. His every movement was crisp, controlled. He looked like a man on official duty, unless you looked closely enough to see the fire behind his eyes. The girl didn't flinch. Even as he approached, she kept her eyes locked on his. He stopped 2 feet away, knelt slowly, not drawing attention, but keeping the wall of bodies between them and the raised platform from seeing too much. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl didn't hesitate. "Clara. Who are you here with?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "The lady in the yellow hat. She's not my mom." Chuck looked over his shoulder. Saw her. An elegant woman. Mid-30s. Sunglasses. Yellow coat and wide hat. Smiling. Clapping politely as the horses passed. Not watching Clara. Watching the balcony. Chuck turned back to the girl. "How did you know to signal me?" Clara blinked. "My uncle taught me. He said if anything ever happened, if I saw a guard I thought might be one of us." Her voice caught. She was shaking now. Chuck placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Solid. Grounding. You did good, Clara. Behind him, the palace guards had taken notice. A comm crackled in his ear, disguised as a ceremonial earpiece. Staff Sergeant Norris, report. What's your status? He tapped the comm twice, a prearranged signal. Threat confirmed. Chuck stood slowly, placing himself between Clara and the parade field. He scanned the woman in the yellow hat again. Something was wrong. Too many layers for spring. Standing too still. Hands never leaving the clutch purse hanging at her side. Inside that purse could be anything. A detonator. A syringe. A signal jammer. Chuck's comm buzzed again. This time the voice was different. Abort protocol initiated. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. He turned the comm off. Without breaking his gaze from the woman, he took Clara's hand. We're going to walk now, he said. Just like we're going for tea. Clara nodded. They stepped through the crowd. Past tourists. Past the marshal. Past startled onlookers and stunned journalists. And Chuck knew, from the way the woman in the yellow hat watched them go without moving, that the situation was bigger than even he'd guessed. She didn't panic. She didn't run. She waited. Because the game wasn't finished. Not yet. As Chuck rounded the far edge of the palace with Clara in tow, a hidden earpiece crackled to life in the woman's ear. A low voice spoke. Guard 3 has the girl. Initiate Plan B. She reached in her clutch. Not for a weapon. For a small silver remote with a blinking red light. She clicked it once. And beneath the parade grounds, underneath the cobblestone where the Queen's Royal Guard had marched for the last half hour, a silent mechanism began to whir to life. Chuck didn't run. He never did. But he moved faster than anyone in the crowd could follow, sweeping Clara behind him, shielding her body with his own as he cut through the perimeter of the parade square. His gloved hand touched his hidden comm once, a signal. 3 seconds later, a disguised entrance beneath the marble viewing platform hissed open. Down they went, the door sealed behind them with a mechanical snap. Silence replaced the parade's roar. The ceremonial brass, the hooves on cobblestone, the cheers gone. Now, just the hum of cold fluorescent light in a narrow stone corridor. Clara stood in the silence like she'd been here before. Like she wasn't surprised. That was Chuck's first real confirmation. This girl wasn't just caught in the middle of something. She was the middle. They walked fast through the service corridor beneath Buckingham Palace. Not many people even knew this level existed, and fewer still could open the reinforced security locks with a fingerprint and voiceprint combo, but Chuck had clearance that predated several wars. He led Clara into a surveillance room, tucked behind a disguised bookcase. Inside, screens, security feeds, heat maps, drone telemetry, underground seismic sensors, all of it real-time. Chuck tapped a key, zoomed in, and there she was, the woman in the yellow hat, still in the crowd, still smiling, still holding the clutch purse in both hands. She hadn't followed. She hadn't run. She hadn't needed to. She's waiting, Clara said softly. Chuck looked at her. She's not just part of this, Clara continued. She's watching for the signal. Chuck's jaw tensed. What signal? I don't know, Clara said. But I think I was supposed to give it. Chuck turned to face her fully. She didn't flinch. She wasn't trembling. He'd seen children in combat zones, in hostage situations, in the aftermath of disasters. There were always tells, shaking fingers, drifting eyes, the stiffness of a scared body trying not to collapse. Clara showed none of them. Who taught you the signal you gave me? Chuck asked. She hesitated, just for a second. My uncle. What's his name? I don't know his real name, she said. I called him Uncle Sam. Chuck raised an eyebrow. That's not funny. I'm not joking. He stared at her. Clara continued. He wasn't really my uncle. He said he worked in diplomacy, but he taught me things. How to recognize threats. How to notice patterns. How to ask for help the right way. He said if I ever saw someone in danger, or if I was in danger, I could use the signal to find someone who'd understand. And you saw me. You didn't move like the other guards. Chuck's expression didn't change, but something inside him bristled. The girl had a soldier's observation skills. That wasn't normal. That wasn't safe. He turned back to the screens, pulled up thermal imaging. There it was, a heat signature under the parade square. Faint, metallic. Cold core, warm shell. Mechanical. Some kind of device embedded beneath the stones. He switched feeds, jumped to seismic sensors. There. Movement. A vertical shift. 2 inches. No explosion. Not yet. But a platform. Rising. Controlled. Quiet. Timed. Non-explosive. A delivery. Or an extraction point. Chuck narrowed his eyes. This wasn't just an attack. It was a pickup. Someone or something was going to vanish during the parade, under thousands of eyes, and Clara was the key. He activated a secure communication link and typed a coded message. Protocol compromised. Threat active. Minor civilian involved. Suspect operative in crowd. Request escalated override. Immediate action. The reply came fast. Too fast. Denied. Stand down. VIP security priority. Do not engage. Chuck exhaled slowly. His blood cooled, but his fists curled. They weren't just ignoring him. They were covering something, which meant 2 things. This mission wasn't authorized. Clara wasn't supposed to survive it. He turned back to her. We're changing locations. I'm going to secure you and get answers. You're going to follow everything I say. No hesitation. Clara nodded. Chuck moved fast, through the corridor, 2 levels down. He brought her to a small, shielded room tucked behind reinforced concrete and a steel door. It was an emergency panic cell, stocked, silent, and invisible to most scans. He crouched in front of her. If I don't come back in 15 minutes, press the red button on the wall. It alerts someone I trust. Are you going to leave me? I'm going to get answers. Clara looked at him. For the first time, her voice cracked slightly. Don't take too long. Chuck gave a rare nod. I won't. He stepped out. The door sealed behind him. Clara stood there for a moment, alone in the quiet. Then she turned and walked to the center of the room. Her fingers touched the edge of the shelf, the corners of the panel, the base of the wall. Looking for something. Listening. And that's when she heard it. A sound so faint it barely existed. A hum. No, a whisper, coming from the vent in the ceiling. A woman's voice. Warm. Soft. Deceptive. Clara. Are you safe, sweetheart? Clara didn't answer. She backed away from the vent. The voice continued. They'll turn you into a symbol, you know. That's what Chuck Norris does. He makes people into things. Weapons. Messages. Heroes. Still, Clara said nothing. The voice grew colder. We gave you a purpose. You were designed for this. And you gave the signal. We saw it. It's already begun. Clara whispered finally. I didn't give it to you. Then she pressed the red button, and all hell began to move. Somewhere below the palace, a steel door hissed open. A platform rose slowly from the underground. On it stood a man in a suit, his face expressionless. In his hand, a syringe, and on the side of his neck, a faint tattoo. Protocol Geneva. He looked toward the security feed, smiled, and said, The pawn is awake. The knight has moved. Now let's see if the king breaks. Chuck moved like a shadow down the corridor, calm, fast, invisible to the cameras. His boots made no sound on the polished stone, even as his eyes flicked to every corner, every blind spot. His instincts were screaming now. The silence in his earpiece wasn't a delay. It was a wall. Whoever was pulling the strings had already silenced external response protocols. He was cut off, which meant Clara was too, and the clock was ticking. A coded access door sat at the end of the hallway, one most operatives didn't even know existed. Chuck had used it once before, years ago, during a chemical threat exercise that turned out to be more than theoretical. Now it scanned his retina, accepted his biometric ID. The door slid open with a whisper. Inside, a room lined with archival terminals, diplomatic logs, and internal data caches. Not just security. Strategy. He typed fast. Clara. Geneva Protocol. The woman in the yellow hat. Hidden agents. Parade layout. And there it was. Not in plain sight, but buried behind 5 firewalls and an intentionally corrupted data key. A file labeled, Pale Lily, Tier 7 clearance only. He decrypted it. What he read chilled him. Pale Lily was not a person. It was a program. A decades-old contingency initiative designed by Geneva Protocol during the Cold War. An experiment in psychological operations using weaponized children. Not assassins, not spies. Bait. Children groomed to trigger events, shape international reactions, and cause high-level decisions to be made emotionally instead of logically. Only a handful were ever trained. Only 3 were reportedly deployed, and 1, known only as Asset C.19, had been presumed dead in a bombing raid 12 years ago. Chuck froze as the profile loaded. The child's photo appeared. Same eyes, same scar near the hairline, same calm expression. Clara. He stepped back from the console, not in fear, in calculation. If Clara was Pale Lily, Asset C.19, then someone had gone to incredible lengths to hide her, smuggle her into position, and activate her now. But why? Why now? Why here? Unless... Chuck turned sharply toward the exit. There is only one reason you activated an asset like Clara in a place like Buckingham Palace during a global broadcast parade. To fracture international trust in the security of the British Crown. Or worse, to assassinate someone and make it look like an inside job. And Clara was the key. Meanwhile, in the hidden panic room, Clara stood still. The voice was gone now, but the red light on the wall blinked steadily. She hadn't pressed it in panic. She pressed it because she remembered. She didn't know why she remembered, just that she'd been told, trained, at some point long ago. If the red light blinks 3 times, you're not being protected. You're being watched. It blinked 3 times, over and over. Clara stepped to the wall panel and placed her palm flat against the cool surface. Her fingers found the edges of a faint seam. She pressed harder. A soft click. A square panel popped open. Inside, wires. She stared for a moment, then pulled one. The cameras in the room died. At the same moment, deep beneath the courtyard, the rising platform reached its apex. The man standing on it stepped off onto the old brick path. He was tall, military-cut hair, dressed like a diplomat but moving like a weapon. The tattoo on his neck confirmed it. Protocol Geneva. He opened his briefcase slowly. Inside, 3 syringes, a passport, and a USB drive labeled Activate/Exfil. He pulled out the syringe and checked his watch. For minutes until Clara would be extracted, Chuck burst into the surveillance room. 2 guards turned. Wrong move. Chuck dropped the first one with a disarm and elbow in under 3 seconds. The second pulled his gun. Chuck twisted, redirected, and used the guard's own momentum to send him headfirst into the steel wall. Both down. He moved to the control terminal, flipped through the feeds. Panicked guards were converging on the east corridor. They weren't chasing him. They were headed for Clara, and they weren't there to protect her. Chuck grabbed a flash charge from the locker and ran. 2 minutes. That's all he needed. In the panic room, Clara was already moving. She'd opened a utility vent and was crawling through the metal, guided only by memory, not from this palace, but from training. Places that came back in pieces. Rooms with white walls. People with no names. Commands spoken in soft, cruel voices. She shook them off, kept crawling, one hand in front of the other, until a hatch opened below her, and she dropped, straight into the corridor. Chuck turned the corner at the same moment. They locked eyes. Then a voice echoed down the hallway. Don't move. A team of 4 armed men, disguised as guards, rounded the corner behind Chuck. He stepped in front of Clara. Didn't speak. Didn't blink. One of the men called out. She's not what you think she is, Norris. She's Geneva. She's bait. Chuck's voice was calm. I don't care who she was trained by. She's a bomb. No, Chuck said. She's a child. The team raised their weapons. And Chuck reached behind his back, pulled a sealed envelope from his coat. He held it up, stamped with the crest of Geneva Protocol. And a single word. Deactivate. The man hesitated. Chuck tossed the envelope to the floor and said quietly, You trained her to be a message. Now I'm here to rewrite it. The man stared at the envelope on the ground like it was a live grenade. His grip on the weapon faltered. Chuck never lowered his guard. His body was between Clara and the team, immovable, like stone, like silence. The man's calm crackled in his ear. He hesitated, then gave a subtle nod to one of the others. That man reached for the envelope and opened it slowly. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, thin, gray, and lined with code. A command string imprinted in Geneva's obsolete language. Protocol override. C.19. Cease/free. Everyone froze. Chuck's voice was quiet. Call it off. The man stepped forward. You had no clearance to access this. Chuck met his eyes. I had the only clearance that matters. Truth. Behind them, Clara watched everything. She didn't hide. She didn't cry. She stood still, the way she'd been taught. But something inside her, something buried under years of whisper commands and quiet obedience, began to shift. She wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. She wanted to be. One of the guards stepped toward Chuck, lowering his weapon. Another didn't. Instead, he turned slightly, pressed a hidden transmitter under his sleeve. Chuck caught the movement. Too late. Far beneath them, in an abandoned server room deep under the royal estate, a series of blinking lights turned red. Encrypted orders went live. Failsafes activated. If asset C.19 is compromised, initiate silent curtain. Back in the corridor, the man who had triggered it looked at Chuck. You don't understand what she is. Chuck didn't move. She's a person. She's a program. She was designed to activate emotional mass response at the cost of sovereignty. She's 9. No, Norris. She's an international weapon. Clara stepped forward. No, she said. Everyone turned. I'm me. The man with the comm raised his gun again. Then you're unfinished. Chuck moved faster than anyone could react. 1 punch. 2. The first guard dropped instantly. The second fired too late. Chuck twisted, catching Clara with one arm and rolling behind the wall as the round sparked against the stone. He pulled a flash charge from his belt. 1 beat. Tossed it. Boom. A blinding white flash filled the corridor. By the time it cleared, Chuck and Clara were gone. They dropped into a secondary tunnel through a hidden shaft Chuck had memorized years earlier, part of an emergency evacuation route, now half collapsed. Chuck moved like he could see in the dark. Clara followed close behind. Finally, after 20 turns and a climb, they stopped inside a room lined with rusted monitors and old ciphers. A Cold War-era dead zone. Clara sat on the floor, her breath shaky. Chuck handed her a canteen. Drink. She did, then asked, was it all real? Geneva? My uncle? The training? Chuck crouched beside her. Yes. And you're part of them? I was. Clara looked down. Then, how do I know you're not lying? Chuck didn't answer. He just held up his right wrist and unstrapped his watch. Underneath was a scar. Straight, deep, burned into him decades ago. The Geneva burn code. Clara touched it gently. Why'd you leave them? Because I stopped asking what I was doing and started asking why. Up above, chaos bloomed. Palace officials scrambled to contain the story. But it was already leaking. A live feed of the security breach had been hijacked and sent across private channels. Photos of Clara. Chuck breaking protocol. Code fragments of Geneva encryption. Someone was releasing it in real time. From inside, in a sleek office buried in a black site somewhere in the Alps, a woman watched it all unfold. She wore a yellow coat. She set down a cup of tea and whispered to herself. He was never supposed to wake her up. She turned to a shadowed figure in the doorway. Activate Ghost Wing. The figure stepped forward. No survivors? She shook her head once. No witnesses. Back in the hidden room, Clara spoke again. My real name isn't Clara, is it? Chuck hesitated. No, but Clara is the name you chose when they gave you a list. She looked up at him. I remember that. You picked it because it meant clear. She blinked fast. It was the only one they didn't frown at. Chuck nodded. Then keep it. A chime buzzed at the entrance to the old server room. Chuck stood instantly, pulled Clara behind him. The door creaked. Someone stepped inside. It wasn't a guard. It was Luis, an old ally, a codebreaker, someone Chuck had trusted since Korea. Luis raised his hands. Easy. I'm here because I intercepted a kill order with your name on it. And hers. Chuck stared. They're burning Geneva. Luis nodded grimly. They're not covering up the leak. They're covering up her. He looked at Clara. They don't want the world to know the truth. Chuck's voice was quiet. Then we show them. Luis pulled a small metal device from his coat. A drive. Every file. Every op. Every face that built Geneva Protocol. Chuck took it. Clara stared at the blinking light on the side. Then asked, what happens now? Chuck looked at her, at the scar on his wrist, at the faint light ahead, and said, Now we finish what they started and rewrite the whole damn system. The rain fell sideways across London. The sky was cracked glass, gray, angry, watching. Inside an unmarked building 2 blocks from Westminster, Chuck Norris stood over a small console, staring at the blinking drive Louise had given him. Every file, every photo, every dirty secret. Geneva Protocol, the ghosts who claimed to protect the world by pulling strings from the shadows, had been catalogued. Every operative, every mission, every time a child was used to nudge history in a certain direction. And Clara? She had her own file. Codename, Pale Lily. Class, reactive asset. Status, retired/disposable. Chuck's jaw flexed. They hadn't even bothered to remove her from the system. She'd never stopped being a tool. Until now. Behind him, Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at a monitor Louise had rigged to a live feed. It was tuned to a global news network. Her face had already hit the airwaves. Grainy footage from a parade-goer's phone showing her giving the signal. Chuck breaking rank, both of them disappearing into the crowd. The headlines weren't subtle. Royal Guard breaks formation to save child. Cover-up or conspiracy? Who is the girl? And why did Chuck Norris move? Whistleblower kid? Civilian or sleeper agent? Chuck muted the TV. I can't stop what's coming, he said. But I can choose what they see first. Clara looked up. I want to speak. Chuck turned. Are you sure? They wanted to use me to start a war, she said. Maybe I can use myself to stop one. Louise opened a secure satellite uplink. Air-gapped. Encrypted. Leaking only to the most-watched newsrooms, investigative platforms, and social media watchdogs. One upload. One burst. After that, it would spread on its own, impossible to stop. Chuck placed the drive into the terminal. The screen filled with folders. Louise opened the one marked Project Lily. Inside, psychological evaluations, medical scans, transcripts, camera footage. A subfolder named Training. Another, Activation Procedures. Chuck hovered over the file labeled Public Statement, an audio file recorded years ago. They clicked play. This is Asset C.19. Age 8. I am ready to serve the directive. I will obey command. Clara flinched. Chuck stopped the recording. You don't have to watch this. She nodded. I do. She stepped up to the mic. Just a simple webcam, rigged and ready. Her voice was steady. Not emotional. Not theatrical. Just real. My name is Clara. I don't know my last name. I don't remember my parents. But I know I was trained by people who said they protected the world. They didn't protect anything. They hid. She glanced at Chuck. They used me. Taught me how to notice danger. How to be invisible. How to get close enough to hurt someone without them knowing it was coming. She paused. Except I didn't want to be a weapon. I wanted to be a child. Louise hit stream. In seconds, her video went live. Not on the news. On everything. Phones. Tablets. Billboards. Screens inside subway stations. Inside NATO headquarters. Inside the UN Security Council hall. Geneva Protocol tried to stop it, but it was too late. Louise had routed it through 17 cascading proxies and buried copies inside blockchain contracts, personal blogs, and photo metadata. It couldn't be scrubbed. It couldn't be undone. The world was watching. And somewhere in a sealed bunker in the Alps, the woman in the yellow coat watched too. Her knuckles turned white around her teacup. Kill switch, she said coldly. Now. The man beside her typed in the command. Kill code. Asset C.19, expire. He hit enter. Back in a London safe house, Chuck's laptop chimed. The Geneva drive glitched for half a second. Louise paled. They triggered her kill protocol. Buried in the file system. It's a neural imprint, psychological, not physical. Chuck spun to Clara. She was breathing fast, eyes wide, fingers trembling. They told me this might happen, she whispered. If I ever disobeyed, it would feel like drowning. Chuck knelt in front of her. You listen to me, he said, calm but firm. You're not theirs. Not anymore. And you never were. She tried to speak. Couldn't. He pressed her hand to his chest. Breathe with me. In, out, in, out. The kill command kept pulsing, a psychological command hardwired through trauma response, buried deep. but Clara breathed through it, slowly, deliberately, until her hands stopped shaking. The screen blinked once, and then, protocol rejected. The code failed. Chuck exhaled. Louise stared in disbelief. She overrode it, with nothing but breath control and will. Chuck stood. She's stronger than the ones who built her. And then came the knock. 3 knocks. Heavy. Intentional. Chuck drew his weapon. Louise looked through the scope. A single man, unarmed, standing outside. Chuck opened the door. The man handed him an envelope. No name. No address. Inside, you exposed us. So now we're exposed too. We're not your enemy. But we're not gone. You started something. Now finish it. Chuck folded the letter, burned it in the fireplace, then turned to Clara. We're not hiding anymore, she said. No, Chuck replied. Now we're building something. What do we do next? Chuck looked out the window. Sirens echoed in the distance. Reporters, drones, and somewhere beyond all of that, truth. He looked down at her, steady as stone. Now we show them what protection really means. The knock on the door wasn't from enemies this time. It was from cameras. By morning, the building was surrounded, not by Geneva's hit teams, but by reporters, truth seekers, and global investigators. Clara's video had detonated across the world like a silent weapon. Not with violence, with exposure. And that made Geneva panic. 3 more whistleblowers came forward within 48 hours. One was a former handler who had trained asset children like Clara under Geneva's Project Pale Lily. One was a logistics coordinator who had seen lists of names and their fates assigned to operations dressed up as diplomatic missions. The third, a woman in hiding for years, Clara's mother. Chuck watched the screen in stunned silence as a recorded message played on an underground press network. The woman's voice was soft, cracked. My name is Sophia. Clara is my daughter. I thought she was dead. They told me she died in an attack they couldn't prevent. But I saw her face yesterday, on a screen, saying things I never taught her to say. And I knew they had taken her and turned her into something I never gave permission for. She looked into the lens. Bring her home. Please, let me hold my child again. Clara didn't cry. She stared at the screen with eyes that didn't belong to someone her age. Chuck crouched beside her. She's real, he said gently. Clara's voice was barely audible. I used to dream about her face. I didn't remember it, but I remembered the feeling. Chuck waited. Then she asked, do I get to be normal now? He didn't answer right away. Maybe not, he said, but you get to be free. Geneva Protocol began to collapse publicly. Leaders who had quietly authorized operations resigned overnight. Encrypted communications leaked onto darknet forums. But the core, the central group behind Geneva, didn't vanish. They just went quiet. The silence of wolves retreating into the treeline. That's what worried Chuck most. 1 week after Clara's video, Chuck got a message. No sender, just coordinates. And a time. He knew what it meant. He packed a small bag, slipped a note into Louise's hand, and told Clara, I'll be back before sunrise. She looked at him. Promise? He paused, then nodded once. Yeah, this time I do. The meeting place was an old church on the edge of a coastal cliff, overlooking the North Sea. Wind roared through shattered windows. Salt stung the air. Inside, 5 figures sat in a half circle. Men, women, gray hair and hard eyes. The founders, not the foot soldiers. The architects. Chuck didn't speak first. One of them did. You broke our last line. Chuck nodded. You crossed it. Another leaned forward. You leaked everything. Chuck didn't deny it. You built your system on stolen children and silent deaths. You don't get to call yourself necessary anymore. Silence. Then, she wasn't meant to survive, one of them said. She did. She won't for long. Chuck stepped forward. Fists loose. Calm. She has me. They looked at him with tired, bitter amusement. You can't protect her forever. Chuck's eyes didn't blink. Then I'll make damn sure the world watches while I do. He turned and walked out. The wind howled. No one followed, but he knew what they meant. The threat hadn't ended. It had just gone deeper. Back at the safe house, Clara was waiting on the steps. She didn't run into his arms. She didn't ask what happened. She just stood there, small, sharp-eyed, steady, and said, I'm not afraid of them anymore. Chuck smiled. You shouldn't be. The next morning, a package arrived. A simple box. No return address. Inside, a folded blanket, a passport in Clara's real name, and a photo of her and her mother, taken years before she vanished. A single note sat on top. She's waiting in Vienna. Go. But not alone. Chuck handed the box to Clara. She stared at the photo, then clutched it to her chest. The jet lifted off just after midnight. No airline logo. No flight plan. Just Chuck, Clara, and a future they were going to meet head-on. As Vienna came into view, Clara asked, "What happens if they come for us again?" Chuck looked at her. The moon caught the scar on his hand. Then he said, "Then they'll learn what happens when a ghost stops running and turns around." The air in Vienna was soft. Spring clung to the buildings. Cafes spilled onto cobblestone streets. Tourists strolled without knowing they were crossing the same paved stones that once hid briefcases full of secrets and shadows that traded silence for safety. But today it was just another city. To most. For Clara, it was everything. Chuck stood just behind her as they crossed into a quiet square near the old opera house. A woman sat alone on a park bench, wringing her fingers around a paper coffee cup. She looked older than the photo, thinner, but when she saw Clara, she froze. Her mouth parted. Her hand reached for her chest. Clara didn't say a word. She walked forward, one step, then another. Then she broke into a run. The woman dropped the cup and caught her mid-stride, arms around her daughter like she might dissolve if she let go. Neither spoke, not for a long time. Chuck didn't move. He just stood there, quiet and steady, letting a stolen decade fall back into place. Her name was Sophia. She took them to a flat above a flower shop, old wood floors and fresh lavender on every windowsill. Clara asked questions, some small, some that could never have small answers. Did you look for me? Yes. Did you give up? Never. Why did they take me? Sophia held her hand. They thought they could make you forget where you came from. Clara blinked slowly. They were wrong. That night, Sophia made tea. Chuck stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the street. Something was off. Too many people paused near the building. A car circled twice in 1 hour. No police. No markings. But he knew the signs. Geneva had followed them. Not to talk. To erase. He dialed Luis. No answer. Tried his backup channel. Dead. He looked at Clara. She saw it in his eyes before he said anything. They're here, aren't they? He nodded once. Sophia's face drained of color. They wouldn't dare. They already have. Chuck moved fast. He pulled a small case from his duffel. Inside, a sidearm, 2 smoke charges, a tracking beacon, and a coin-sized EMP disc. He handed Clara the beacon. Put this in your pocket. No matter what happens, you keep moving. Clara held it tight. I'm not running again. Chuck looked at her. You're not. You're leading. At 2:08 a.m., the hallway creaked. 3 men. Silent steps. Weapons drawn. Black clothing. No insignia. But Chuck had expected them. The first reached for the door handle. Chuck opened it for him. Crack. 1 strike. The man dropped. Before the other 2 could react, Chuck dropped the smoke charges, kicked the table into their knees, and slammed the door shut behind them. Go, he yelled. Sophia and Clara moved down the fire escape. Chuck followed, last out. They raced through narrow alleys, through night markets being broken down, through delivery corridors behind shuttered shops. Chuck directed them with precise hand signals, left, down, duck. At the Danube Canal, they paused. Clara was breathing hard but steady. Sophia clutched a photo in her coat. Chuck's burner buzzed. Luis. Finally. The message was short. They're not after her. They're after you. Chuck stared at the screen. Of course. Of course Geneva wouldn't let him walk away clean. Clara was their past. But Chuck? Chuck was the reckoning. And now they wanted to shut it. He turned to Sophia. You take her to this address. He handed her a card. Underground safe house. People we can trust. I'm not leaving without. You're not leaving me. You're protecting her. Sophia stared at him, then nodded once. Clara stepped forward. You said we'd stay together. Chuck looked her in the eyes. We will. Then I'm not leaving, either. The first gunshot split the night. A sniper. Close. Deliberate. Not meant to hit. Meant to hurt. Chuck grabbed Clara's hand. Ran. Through the archway. across the bridge, toward the Kunsthistorisches Museum, vast, empty at night, but familiar to Chuck from another life. He led them inside, sealed the old maintenance door, pulled them through a labyrinth of exhibits and halls. Paintings stared down like silent witnesses. They reached a side atrium. Chuck stopped, listened. Clara leaned against him. Sophia looked around. There's nowhere left to go. Chuck looked up. Yes, there is. A spiral staircase. He led them to the roof. And there, waiting in the dark, was Luis. Helicopter running. Doors open. 5 minutes, he called. Can't give you more. Chuck loaded them in. Sophia grabbed his arm. What about you? I'll follow. He closed the door. Tapped the roof twice. The bird lifted. Geneva's agents swarmed into the square moments later. Chuck didn't run. He stood in the center of the roof. Arms down. Eyes cold. Waiting. A black SUV skidded to a stop. The door opened. The woman in the yellow coat stepped out. No smile. Just silence. She looked at Chuck, then said, You could have been one of us. Chuck stared back. I was. Until I remembered I was human. She nodded once, then gave the order. Erase him. Chuck exhaled, rolled his shoulders, and whispered, Try. The rooftop was silent, except for the thudding beat of the helicopter retreating into the clouds. Below, Geneva operatives spread like shadows through the square, rifles low, calm, methodical. On the roof, Chuck stood alone. No body armor, no backup, just his breath, his fists, and the certainty that this was the final page. The woman in the yellow coat stepped closer, her heels clicking against the stone. You could have walked away. Chuck didn't answer. She tried again. She was our investment. You were our sword. Why burn it all? Chuck looked up at her, eyes like steel behind glass. Because I finally looked at what we were protecting. She nodded, almost respectfully, then gave a nod. 2 agents raised their weapons. But before the first shot could ring out, a blinding flash erupted from a square. Gas, light, static. From behind a column, Luis emerged, launching a second round of smoke and laying down cover fire with a custom pulse rifle. You think I was going to miss this part? He shouted. Chuck moved instantly. 2 steps, 1 twist, crack, 1 agent down. The second staggered, disoriented. Chuck disarmed him in a blur of motion and used his own weapon to clip the comms tower nearby. Sparks flew. Geneva's comm net went dead. Below, the agents scrambled without orders. The system was crumbling. The silence that always protected them was now working against them. Louis sprinted to Chuck's side. You good? Never better. The woman in the yellow coat stood very still. She realized too late. They'd underestimated one thing. Not Chuck's strength, not his rage, but his conviction. She reached for a panic switch in her coat. Chuck was there before her hand made it halfway. He took it from her gently, pressed it, and dropped it into the vent below. Then he leaned close. You ran this world from behind curtains, he said. But now the world sees the wires. By dawn, it was over. Geneva's last command cell had scattered. The names had been released. The files decrypted. Whistleblowers came forward faster than threats could silence them. And Clara? She walked through the gates of an international tribunal with her mother at her side and gave testimony the world could not ignore. Not as an asset, not as a weapon. As a child, they tried to erase and failed. Chuck didn't speak at the hearings. He didn't sit on the stage. He just watched. And when it was done, when the final gavel fell and the last official resigned, he slipped away into the crowd. Back to the shadows. Back to peace. Vienna. 1 year later. In a quiet park, a man sat on a bench with a paperback in his hand and a cane at his side. A little girl walked up, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. She sat beside him and offered a thermos. Still no sugar? She asked. Chuck smiled. Still black. Clara looked ahead at the kids running through the grass. I start school tomorrow. He nodded. You ready? She took a deep breath. I've survived worse. He chuckled softly. You've ended worse. They sat in silence for a while. Then Clara asked, Do you think they're really gone? Chuck looked up at the sky, then down at the scar on his wrist. Maybe not. But if they ever come back, he said, they'll remember what happened the last time they touched something innocent. She leaned against him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, because some legends don't live for the glory. They live to make sure no one else has to become one, just to survive. The end.